So far in my videos on anime and disability, links to both of them down in the description, I've only talked about anime and physical disabilities, but it's about time we talk about the psychological ones. Welcome one and all, I am Coriander Stone, and today I'm bringing you a video on disability in RWBy, the power of trauma. Trauma is a tricky thing, manifesting differently in different people, which in turn makes it a tricky thing to portray in fiction. That said, I'm going to take a minute and talk about the ways in which the members of teams RWBy and Juniper experience trauma, and we'll move from there to the disability aspects of this video because this video will be focusing mostly on PTSD. Incidentally, quick heads up spoiler warning. I'm going to start after the fall of Beacon, and I'm going to start with Team Juniper, specifically Lyren and Nora, since they're the ones who were least traumatized by the fall of Beacon. The reason for this is pretty simple. The fall of Beacon was neither their first nor their biggest tragedy. Lyren and Nora experienced far worse during the destruction of their home village. And so, yes, it was awful and traumatic. Yes, they were Pyrrha's friends, and Pyrrha's death is going to haunt them for the rest of their lives, and Penny's too. Yes, it's going to haunt them, and yes, it was awful, but it wasn't traumatic for them in the same way as it was for characters who have lived fairly sheltered lives and who have never experienced this before. They already have their PTSD, they already have their trauma, and that's not from this. They know how to handle this, and so they're the ones who are able to move forward because, again, this is something they've experienced before, and this is something that their brains are familiar with. Moving from there to Jean, finishing up Team Juniper. Jean, well, he is definitely sheltered. He's in fact the most sheltered out of any of them since he didn't fight at all before coming to Beacon. He also responds fairly okay. He is, of course, devastated by Pyrrha's death, as we see near the end of Volume 3 when he realizes that she's going to die and has a complete mental break. But that translates to him putting himself back together by the start of Volume 4. Part of the reason he's able to put himself back together this way is because of his desperation to live up to Pyrrha's memory, as we see in his nightly training sessions. He is so desperate to make it through and to be what she wanted him to be in her memory's name that he has to hold himself together, but that doesn't mean he's just able to keep going. Oh no. His emotions are still wild and angry, and they come out in bitterness. It's an incredible amount of bitterness he has toward Ozpin, toward Crow, toward all of their comrades, because they were the ones who set Pyrrha up as a maiden. They were the ones who got her involved, and they ultimately were, at least in his mind, responsible for her death. And so this is the way he copes, by blaming them. Out of the members of Team RWBy, RWBy is the one who's coping the best. Part of that is just her personality. She's an incredibly upbeat person who keeps moving forward. But that doesn't mean the deaths don't affect her, and that doesn't mean the trauma of Beacon doesn't affect her. See, RWBy's probably the one who was the most traumatized in her own way, because RWBy not only witnessed both deaths, but she was also the one who could have prevented them and didn't get there in time. If she had just gotten past Mercury, she was the only one who realized what was going on between Pyrrha and Penny and realized that it would result in Penny's death. And she didn't make it past Mercury, and Penny died. And then Jean tipped her and Weiss off that Pyrrha was in trouble, and RWBy ran. And if she'd gotten there a minute sooner, he could have saved Pyrrha. But she didn't. She got there when she did, and so Pyrrha died. This has got to be horribly traumatic for her, but she manages to keep going incredibly well. And part of that, again, is her upbeat personality, but part of it is also the way in which she copes. She's keeping moving forward because that's what she knows how to do, and because that's what she feels like she has to do. But also, we learn more about how she's dealing and why she's doing what she's doing during her conversation with Oscar when she tells him that she knows that if she'd been the one who was killed at Beacon, Penny or Pyrrha, whichever one survived, would have kept going and would have kept fighting and would have avenged her. And so she is doing what she's doing because she knows that they would have done that for her. And that is the power that's keeping her moving. It's this need to do for the dead what they would have done for her. And also because she's going to keep pressing forward. As we see in her letter writing at the end of Volume 4, that she's got this weight of needing to do things for the people who haven't died yet, and then she's got this other part of her saying, no, don't think of it like that. We're going to get through this, and we're going to make it right, and we're going to finish this. And that's actually a pretty sophisticated and layered reaction, and that's the thing really. All of these reactions are sophisticated, they're layered, they're intricate, and that's what I really have to commend Rooster Teeth for on their writing, is the way in which they're portraying this trauma. Moving on to Blake. She's the one place where I feel like this writing falls down a little bit, and I feel like this is the core of the problem I have with her character, I guess. On one hand, I really love Blake, and I like the way she responded. It makes a lot of sense. She had this incredibly abusive relationship in the past. She finally escaped from it. She wanted nothing to do with it. She wanted to completely separate out her two lives. She was afraid to get close to anyone again after that, afraid that it would go badly for them, afraid that they would get hurt, or she would hurt them, or they would hurt her. But then she did get close to Team RWBy, and so she wanted it to be completely separate from her old life in the White Fang and with Adam. And then now here's her past, her incredibly horrid past, coming back to haunt her. And, like, this is the nightmare scenario for her. Adam's back, and he cuts off Yang's arm, and it's her fault. And, like, again, this is her nightmare. And she's living in it, and so it makes sense that she'd react by running away. That she wanted to get her friends out of the line of fire, that she didn't want them getting caught up in this anymore. All of that makes a lot of sense, and I do appreciate that as an understandable character reaction, even if it wasn't necessarily a popular choice. The problem I had with that is the way she runs home. I get why, from a writing standpoint, that happened. They wanted her to go home. They wanted Menagerie to get involved. They wanted that plot arc. And for that plot arc and for what they'd planned out for Blake, they needed her to go home, and that's why she went home. But it doesn't actually make any sense. If the whole reason for her running away from Team RWBy is that she felt like she was endangering them by being there, and that she felt that leaving was the only way to protect Team RWBy and to protect the people she cares about, so she runs to other people she cares about, because clearly she cares about her parents very much too, so that was just the little thing that just didn't quite make sense. I mean, I guess there's a thing of, oh, she's running for safety, but again, wouldn't she be afraid that they'd get involved, especially since the White Fang is on Menagerie, so it's not even like she's getting farther away from them. That's just the thing that keeps bothering me. But that said, her emotional reaction and her emotional state is good, and I like the way it's evolving over the course of the last 2 seasons in terms of her really coping with her running away and coping with having to stay and fight and coping with the fact that the people who care about her aren't going to get hurt because of her and they want to be there anyway and letting them in. And that's a really strong development for her based on her traumatic reaction to the fall of Beacon. Still, the running still bothers me. Anyway, moving on to the 2 characters I really wanted to talk about when it comes to PTSD and disability and what this video is really about. Weiss and Yang. They both experience incredible amounts of PTSD over the course of the season, that being season 4 and into season 5, and I want to talk about the way that's done and the way it's handled. Starting with Weiss. Let me first say that I love the fact that she has PTSD. See, when we think about characters traumatized at Beacon, we think about Yang, who got her arm cut off. We think about Blake, who had her nightmare scenario happen. We think about RWBy, who watched Kira and Penny die and was seconds away from saving them. We don't think about Weiss. We don't think about the fact that she was Kira's friend too, and she was Penny's friend too. And so the fact that the creators really picked up on that, and on her character, I really appreciate. She was just as traumatized. She lost friends there too. And then to have to go home to a place that is so different, so peaceful in a way that is denying the conflict and denying what she went through, is just horrible for her. And you can see that in her actions. She has mental breaks. Her mental break at the charity concert was really interesting. It shows how much the fall of Beacon changed her as a person. Before the fall of Beacon, she was able to cope with stuff like that. She didn't love it, she hated it, but she was able to play her father's games. But now, she can't do it. She can't deal with it. She can't deal with people denying what she went through at Beacon. She can't deal with people belittling it when they don't have a clue. And the frustration and anger of that, and the juxtaposition between the ballroom and the battlefield is just too much for her, and she breaks down. And it's so interesting to see how this continues to play out through her character and through her interactions with her father. And in the end, her coping mechanism is to leave and to get back to her friends and to get back to the people who understand her and understand what she went through. Look at her reaction when she sees Yang again for the first time. Even though she and Yang were never super close, it's just this desperate need to be back with the people who get it and the people who support her and her support network. And getting back to them is incredibly powerful for her. Now let's talk about the single best use of trauma I've ever seen in an anime, or whatever RWBy is. And that is Yang. Gold star, Rooster Teeth, gold star for your handling of her PTSD. I want to preempt this by explaining how most stories, whether anime, Western TV shows, books, whatever, portray PTSD, especially anime, but really all of them. They either have it as this thing that becomes a center point for an arc, you know, oh, the character's depressed and they have PTSD and blah blah blah. And then stuff happens with their friends to snap them out of it and they're over it and everything's happy again and it's just gone. Or it's used as a pivot point to turn a character into an angsty edgelord. Honestly, neither of these two portrayals are super realistic. Yes, it is possible to get over and get past PTSD, but it's not as easy as all that. And yes, PTSD can drastically alter someone's character and personality, but to a realistic amount. Let's be realistic, people. But yeah, so Yang. Yang has PTSD from the first. She is incredibly traumatized by what happened to her at Beacon. I mean, she literally lost her arm. She lost her arm, Blake ran, Pyrrha died, Penny died, and she falls into depression, and the depressive part of PTSD, until RWBy's leaving snaps her out of it a little bit, and her father snaps her out of it, and gradually she moves forward a bit more, and starts pushing past that amount of depression that's blocking her in, and her fear. And you can see it in her fighting too. When she fights with Taeyang, Yang was the brash huntress who charged headfirst into everything, but now suddenly there's fear in her movement, there's hesitation because of the fear, because of what happened when she fought Adam, because she charged in there and lost her arm, and there's still this instinctive fear. Even if her mind's trying to get past it, she can't. And eventually, sparring with him and working with him and her time spent with him, she starts to heal and she starts to recover and she starts to move forward and become determined to keep going. But at the same time, that doesn't make her PTSD go away. She still has PTSD. It isn't this thing where you can just flip a switch and suddenly she's fine again. That's just not how disability works. And that's not how it works in RWBy either, which is something I really appreciate. We see it so far again and again in Volume 5, where Yang has this tremor. She'll get into a fight, or she'll go to accept a glass of water and she starts shaking, which is the physical manifestation of the trauma that she's trying to push back and trying to suppress, which is just an incredible touch that I really, really appreciate. It's not some big plot point that they're talking about or anything, it's just this visual detail. It gives her character so much depth and so much reality that I incredibly appreciate. She isn't hesitating in fights anymore, but she still has this instinctual holding back, this fear and this struggle, and she still has some of the other emotional components of PTSD as well, like the anger that bursts out of her at Blake when she's talking to Weiss, or the way she assumes that Weiss doesn't have a clue what she feels like. And it's just this anger and this feeling of isolation, which again are characteristic of PTSD, and the way that Yang is exhibiting all of that and struggling with them even now, even when her character started moving forward again, even when she's seemingly healed and back to the battlefield and back to being her own self, that's incredible to me, because that shows that she is really a character that's three-dimensional, and that she's really well written, and that Rooster Teeth is really taking seriously the idea of PTSD and trauma and what that actually does to a person, and it's incredible to see such a faithful portrayal of it in a show. The way that was done was something I highly appreciated, especially compared to the other anime that features a disabled character this season. I'll get to you next time, Blood Blockade Battlefront. In the meantime, if you're interested in hearing me talk more about disability, check down in the comments for my videos on disability and spoon theory in My Hero Academia, and disability and Fate Apocrypha, What Guilty Crown Did Right. And if you want to hear me talk more about RWBy, click over to my channel and check out my analyses of the RWBy openings. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment letting me know if you enjoyed this sort of thing. If there are any other examples of disability in anime that you're interested in me talking about, please let me know. This is Coriander Stone, and I thank you for watching.